Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. How's everybody's day going? Happy Victoria Day for anybody who is in the UK or in Canada who celebrates that. Welcome to the stream. If it's anybody's first time here, please let yourself be known. I always want to see who are the new faces who have come to join in with the stream today. So, hey. Yeah, so, I guess, oh, gosh, dang it. This is happening again. One sec. Alrighty. Let's see if this works. Still no. Okay. Alright. I hope that this works. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream. I see there are some new people. Lindsay Phillips, welcome to the stream. I'm glad this is your first time here. I hope to not disappoint you with all of this weird connection issues that have been happening, have been plaguing my streams lately. I don't know what the hell it's about. I thought I paid for pretty good internet, but I think it might be a server issue because it always seems that my solution is just to either switch to the backup or to the primary servers, which makes me think that the streaming servers are getting overloaded or something strange is going on with them. Anyways, friends, welcome to the Countdown stream, which is a weekly stream I do in the hour before a new quick step goes live, I should say. Couple things that I want to cover for housekeeping purposes. Just to cover for the next few weeks, just because some changes are going to have to happen to the streaming schedule, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. So, because of some rescheduling at work, next week, I'm going to be doing the Countdown stream on Friday rather than Monday. Reason being is that basically one of my coworkers is traveling next weekend, and she wants me to cover her shift on Monday, and then in return she'll cover my shift on Friday. So I'll be doing the stream on Friday, and instead of being a countdown to a quick step video, it's going to be a countdown to a new Step Back Prime video, because next Friday is a new Step Back video. That's terrifying. Just a little bit. So that's a thing that I am thinking a lot about. But yeah, so next week it'll be Friday instead of Monday, so on the 31st will be the next countdown stream. The other thing too is that a few weeks after that, pending something doesn't drastically change, I don't think I'm going to be able to keep doing these afternoon countdown streams beginning with the week of the 17th of June. Mainly just because, again, my work schedule's changing, I think. As far as I have been told, unless something drastically changes, on the 17th of May, or so the 17th of June, I'll be on a full-time schedule, and so I won't be able to I won't be around in the afternoons to do these countdown streams unless it's a holiday. Which, there will still be a few holidays, but that's like once a month. That's not like every week. But who knows where things are going to change? That's all I got to say to that. But that's where things stand now. Okay. With all of that out of the way, this, for anybody who it's their first time here, this is, a quick thing I do for an hour before a new video comes out. Answer some questions, hang out, share some experiences, and have some love. I'm gonna have a nice little cup of tea while we do this thing. Ooh, that's a good one. And yeah, just keep going on. So, question the first: are you boycotting Eurovision? I am boycotting Eurovision just like I do every single year. In that, I don't think I've ever watched Eurovision ever. I think the only time I even heard that Eurovision was a thing that existed was that one year where the Austrian bearded woman won with a song called Rise Like a Phoenix or something like that. That was the only time I had ever seen a Eurovision thing. Wait, no, I have one other exception, which is there was an Estonian presentation on Eurovision one year that did a song that became a meme, and so I saw the presentation of that song, which was the Estonians doing the song Rockefeller Street, which was like a song that they made about New York City that made no sense because there's no such thing as a Rockefeller Street, but then it became a TikTok meme, so I just looked it up and saw what it was about. So that's basically the thing. So that's my Eurovision thing. So I'm not watching it this year, just like every other year. I haven't seen a single episode of Game of Thrones. I don't care about spoilers. What are all the spoilers I should know before I start watching it? I feel like that's a bad thing to do in the stream. It did just come out yesterday, but I will say that the video that comes out at the end of this hour is about Game of Thrones. But if I were to give you a short rundown about whether or not about what it's a show about power and how people abuse power and how power has a corroding effect on people. Now that it's all done. 255. The other day you said social democracy could be converted into full communism. How would that happen exactly? I thought you thought converting from capitalism to communism was impossible. I don't recall saying that social democracy could be converted into full communism. That's something that a democratic socialist might believe. But no, I believe that, definitely moving to social democracy would be an improvement on what we have now. But that definitely there's no way of, the state giving away. The state doesn't usually give away power. The real end will be to have to make the state irrelevant by taking away the different facets of it and transferring it to democratic control. Which I believe there can be a process of that, of us just sort of through direct action, replacing the functions of the state with our own functions of the state, replacing various things with collective resources and stuff like that. Hopefully. But that also feels very difficult to keep together. But that's just my strange thinking. But I really don't see, with the nature of how political power functions, the state ever just giving up their power. All right. So, Lindsay Phillipso, I'm a dumb American. What exactly is Eurovision and why is it bad? From what I know, it is a thing where a bunch of European countries get together and do these musical performances, and there's basically a contest to see who wins. So think about almost like American Idol, but instead it's a national team of people who are doing a big song presentation that gets them all the way to the end. That's what I know. The reason why people are saying it's bad is because Eurovision includes Israel, and Israel, the Palestinians this year have requested that people in the West basically boycott Eurovision until they no longer include Israel as part of Eurovision, because the general plan is to cut away at the normalization of Israel as a state and sort of part of a larger project of diplomatically isolating Israel until it can stop its genocidal acts against Palestinian people and its active apartheid state. Sort of like what happened with South Africa in the 80s. It's the same idea. Don't play concerts in Israel. Don't let them be part of Eurovision. Don't like until they deal with the fact that they are actively committing genocide to the Palestinian people, don't participate. Is that teacup bigger on the inside? Do I ever have to refill that mug? Very well astute. Yeah, it's a TARDIS mug, Doctor Who thing. It's my favorite mug. It's really nice. It's really big. I am a fan. I guess that's like one thing Ajit Pai and I have in common is fans of very big mugs. As someone who drinks a lot of tea, I am a fan of this one. Have you heard of Atari? And if you have, what do you think about them? I have not heard of Atari. Sorry. How do you feel about having the U.S. term limit rules apply to parties as well as individuals, so no party could hold the presidency for more than 8 years at a time? I mean, I don't see what the point of that would be. Like, especially, I mean, I guess, like, that tries to, like, move away from a two-party system. Because then, you know, you would move up to at least 3. But I have a feeling that the institutional power that parties have would make something like that extremely disruptive, if not untenable. Because there's always going to be, like, there's 2 general veins of political thought in most countries, maybe 3, and the voting constituencies of people don't change, and if political parties are supposed to represent political interests, then you should not, like, you know, banning a political ideology from an election does feel a little strange to me. I would be more of a fan of, like, most countries have have 3 political strains in their body politic: liberals, conservatives, and socialists. And to say, okay, this election, since the liberals were in charge for 8 years, now the next election can only be between socialists and conservatives. That feels weird. Even weirder is if you look at most political parties, instead of representing ideas, they often represent people. People and specific groups' interests in sort of a coalition of interests. And to say, like, all right, well, the Democratic Party, which largely represents the political interests of Black Americans as well as many other marginalized groups, they just can't run this time because their term limits are up. So now like their vehicle in Parliament or Congress doesn't really get to do much. I would say that those are things that need to be addressed. So I don't know how the term limit thing would work. All right. Could the Industrial Revolution have happened if capitalism ended before it started? Does having an Industrial Revolution necessitate having an exploited proletariat? I think the thing that I think what you're talking about like superstructure and base, the sort of the tempo of a Marxist interpretation of how economies and social structures adapt to economic changes. And what I would say in that is that it's kind of putting the cart before the horse in a bit of a way. What Marx would say, if I were challenging, if I were channeling leftist Santa here, it would be that Marx would say that we don't really have that kind of agency, that, like, capitalism is a thing that will naturally develop as we develop industrialized economies. And so, and that we don't really have a way, like, getting rid of capitalism is a thing that will come when the material realities of our world match or are changed to the point where the social relations of capitalism are no longer relevant, and that at some point they will strain to the point where the social relations will break, and there will be what he calls a revolution, in which case a new order will show up. And then what Marx would argue is that because the Industrial Revolution is breaking the relationship between the amount of labor time put into making commodities and moving it to such a low number, that the amount of work hours that go into making the commodities we need would get so low that the strain to have workers and a sort of owner class would strain to the point where they would break, and there would be no more need for people to have all the things they want, because at some point, as the amount of labor time that goes into making a commodity approaches zero, you're basically looking at post-scarcity levels of economic development. And in that case, there's no real need for a class that owns the means of production and a class that works for those owners. That's what he calls communism. That is, I would say that Marx was a little reductionist on that. I think that there is validity to that argument, but there's also a lot of stuff to worry about with that, because Marx doesn't factor in the limits of the natural resources of the planet. He doesn't factor in the just how much staying power capitalism has had over the years. If this was true, if Marx was 100% correct, we would be in a situation in which the because we approach a situation where everybody could have their material needs met without a whole lot of labor on anyone's part, like 50 years ago, but yet capitalism still sticks around. And I would argue that there are technologies and developments that Marx was unaware of that would factor into this thing, that are not just about, that are not so reductionist. For example, I think that nuclear weapons play a large role of the proliferation of capitalist hegemony. The fact that the bourgeoisie class now effectively owns weapons powerful enough to destroy the entire planet several times over leads to a proletariat class that functionally has no method of successful revolution anymore, which kind of has led for the cycle, the straining of capitalism to keep growing. And then also he didn't really factor in post-industrial capitalism, service capitalism. He didn't factor the idea that we could have a global South to work as our global proletariat while inequality stands to grow. I don't think he pictured a integrated economy at that level. So there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that are still changing. And so, what was the question again? Does having an industrial revolution necessitate having an exploited proletariat? It did at one point, but not now. So, yeah. All right, Hatari is Iceland's bondage-clad anti-capitalism techno band like Rammstein, but directly political. With that little bit, are you interested in learning more about them? That'd be fun. I do like all of the weird shit Iceland thinks up. There's never a not weird thing that comes out of Iceland, so I would definitely want to see what that's all about. Reminds me that I guess Iceland's starting to export skewer, something. It's like this cheese that has the consistency and taste of yogurt. That's apparently really good for you and really tasty, and it's really popular in Iceland. But they're starting to export it to other countries. It's supposed to be coming to Canada soon. I should try it. I'm glad they're exporting that and not like Puffin Hearts or something. Skier, that's what it's called. Okay, so Democratic Communist. Will you call yourself a socialist or a communist? I think I would call myself a little bit more of a socialist than a communist. But overall, I would call myself an anarchist. The reason why I say socialist and not anarchist is because I have, like with the conversation I just had, I have doctrinal disagreements with Marx on a few things. Not everything, but a few things. To the point where I think that the way that Marxists envision the path towards communism as sort of inevitable is short-sighted, and that there are other factors such as the proliferation of colonization, racism, sexism, homophobia, things like that are preventing class consciousness that communists, as they call themselves, tend not to address in a meaningful way. On top of that, as I just talked about with superstructure and base, is that that's too reductionist of a way of thinking about the way that revolution can take place, and that really that there are also serious issues with the idea of Marxist revolution that that we saw when, like, you know, the Soviet Union happened, where successful revolutions still had to contend with the fact that they were inheriting capitalist systems that they then, but without any, even with the quote-unquote dictatorship, the proletariat still turned into authoritarian dictatorships. And I think that there's a lot more in that to talk about that we haven't done in a meaningful way, in my opinion. Speaking of Santa, should we make a Santa Claus anti-capitalist action movie where he and his elf comrades deliver free gifts while fighting off companies and countries that want his tech and stop him? Oh man, Christos, yes, I would watch that movie. I could see that being a really great, like, over-the-top, ridiculous action movie. I would love that. It'd be fun. It reminds me of this. There was this podcast that it was called Cool Games Inc., where it was an improv show where basically they two people, one of them turned out to be shit, so the show got canceled very abruptly about a little under 2 years ago, where they would get a prompt about video games and they had to basically do, like, improv out what the things would be, and one of them was a sandbox RPG called Christmas Eve Online, where it's basically all about preparing to deliver presents on Christmas, and that, like, it's this whole sandbox game about making all the gifts and delivering all the presents and everything like that. And yeah, so, you know, there's a start in all of that, and I apologize for that police car. Okay. It sounds like a fire truck, actually. All right. Global warming as an issue making capitalism more likely to survive because societies become more conservative and they are dealing with major issues, World War II? Or does it challenge basic structure? Well, Glitch42, I would say that climate change or global warming, or whatever you want to call it, shows the existential threat that capitalism provides to humanity, that we're really not going to be able to ever eternally address without getting rid of it. I think people are really now starting to acknowledge that. It's coming slowly, but they are getting there. Not fast enough, though, which is the problem. But I honestly don't think, to answer your question, Glitch42, I think climate change challenges capitalism to its very core, because it shows that infinite growth on a finite planet was never possible, and we are hitting those limits in a very important way. But on top of that, I don't think that capitalism and a human race can coexist forever. So, whether or not we go extinct because we clung on to capitalism, or we survive in whatever form we do. We've already done irreparable damage to the planet, but whether or not we survive diminished but still where we are, that would be awesome. But we'll see. We'll see. That's the decision we have to make. That's the political decision that millennials and Zoomers are going to make over the rest of our lives. All right. Suppose the U.S. invaded North Korea and then the disaster capitalist complex rebuilt it. Would the people be better off or worse than they are now? I mean, I can't speak too much about what's going on in North Korea. I do know that the story we get about North Korea is very dismal, that it is one of the most authoritarian, repressive regimes in human history. That's also because we really never hear North Korea's side of the story. So I don't know. From the things I've heard, it's really, really bad. That even disaster capitalism could possibly save it. I don't know, because like the whole like Naomi Klein, like if America invaded North Korea and somehow didn't trigger the end of the world, the fact that they would get like American corporations to come in and rebuild would mean that I don't know if North Korea would be much better off, but I would probably think they'd be about the same, to be honest. What would end up out of that is that the North Koreans in general would probably be slightly better off, just because not because it'd be like if Cuba had its communist regime fall, while the country would become objectively less free and more unequal and people would suffer, things would improve, at least in the short term, because it would result in the lifting of a whole bunch of economic embargoes. Like, the reason why a lot of communist countries look like they're poor and just scraping by is because they are essentially completely economically isolated from the rest of the planet. And so, like, no countries trade with them, no countries will make deals with them, and so they have to become, like, radically self-sufficient and radically, they have to be very, very careful with resource management. And that resorts in not so fun living circumstances where, like, honestly, if you wanted North Korea to liberalize and become more open, one of the things that would help would be to, give them aid and let them be part of the international community, which they aren't. But what's more likely to happen is I don't think America's ever going to go to war with North Korea. What's probably going to happen is that the Americans are going to fund a military coup of North Korea. There's been talk about dissent amongst Kim Jong-un's government, his generals and him, for a long time. That's probably just going to be like, yeah, North Korea does have some trading allies with China and Russia, but it's still, things are tough. It also comes down to that North Korea has a very different concept of what freedoms are than, like, a liberal country. And, North Korea does have public health care, free universities, and stuff. It's all, like, insane, like, propaganda and such, but, really depends. All right. Do you think calling themselves Marxist or Trotskyist or whatever is useful? I feel like these persons died, and I think that they would have wrote more if they had lived longer. Marx died before Capital. I mean, they're useful words in a specific context. Like, honestly, when it comes to talking about different intellectual movements in left organization, they're useful. They say specific things about internal affairs but they oftentimes become the seeds of disunity and violent disagreement. Like, for example, Trotskyists are people who advocate that we need to make basically an authoritarian Soviet-like state so that you can create an international vanguard party and lead a Red Army to literally invade all of the capitalist countries and overthrow them. That is like the Trotskyist worldview. That it's called the permanent revolution, that the military needs to be a powerful communist military needs to physically overthrow all the nations of the world, and that's the only time that we can really start building the socialist society we want, is when capitalism has been defeated on the battlefield, which I feel like in our modern age would be one of the most disastrous ideas in history. But I do think they are useful terms because they do exemplify different ideologies and different very important distinctions and disagreements within leftist groups. Do you wish more leftists on Twitter or YouTube call themselves anarchists? Do you think that being a vague leftist without a plan or ideology to move forward doesn't help the cause? No. I do think, like, as I just kind of said when I talked about like Trotskyist and Marxist, like those are important when talking about like methods and like within a leftist movement. But when it comes to general activism, the less distinctions we can make between each other, the better, in my opinion. We have to realize that even though we have disagreements about the hows and the whys, our what is all the same, and we need to kind of work on that. Like, we have plenty of time to fight over whether or not we're going to have a communist state or an anarchist commune-based society when we've been able to, get ourselves in the same goddamn room and have some actual political power. That's like, that's my take on that. Robin Peterson, thank you so much for the $5 super chat. That is really, really kind of you. For Step Back to keep functioning. Right now, I'm in a really awkward phase for the channel where my income between my day job and Step Back is about 50-50, and but Step Back takes up a full-time amount of work that I can only do when I'm not at day work, which means that I awkwardly balance 2 full-time jobs, and any bit that can be contributed, like you just did, Robin, towards making this a thing where I can jettison one and keep the other, will help me keep myself mentally together, but also result in better content for you. So you just contributed $5 towards, and it all adds up. You contributed $5 towards making that better, and I appreciate that. I think that's World Revolution. Permanent Revolution is Maoist. Oh, okay. Well, Christos, I'm not great at that stuff. So thank you very much, Robin. And thank you, Christos. I appreciate that. Suppose we end up in a future where 95% of the population wants capitalism to end. Could the bourgeoisie sustain it in spite of that? Yeah. When one side has the apocalyptic amounts, I mean, right now, I think that like it would be unstable, it would be violent and brutal, but yeah, that remaining 5% has all the nukes and all of the Predator drones and all of the tanks and all those things that I really think that like the amount of destructive power that a very small percentage of the population has access to basically results in the violent overthrow of the state as being our gateway towards revolution is not the solution for us. Dalton Jones, thank you very much for the $1 super chat. Again, you are contributing towards making Step Back a thing that I can do and make better for you. So much appreciated, Dalton. You're a hero. Lindsay, holy moly. Lindsay, thank you also for the $1 super chat. Much appreciated. You guys are far too kind today. I I am touched. I am touched by your generosity. I should answer some more questions. Feel like I need to dance for my dollars. All right. How did medieval people view the idea of democracy? Did medieval scholars have any arguments for why having kings was better than the somewhat democratic systems that existed in Greece and Rome? All right, let's go through these one by one. So, did medieval people have an idea of democracy? No. Most people didn't have it. Okay, I shouldn't say that. People had most people who lived in what would be called "quote unquote" medieval Europe had a form of democracy. It's just not a form of democracy that we recognize today as democracy. They were still subjects under feudal lords, but very often the feudal lords that they were subjects under were fairly disconnected from their day-to-day lives. So very often, nobles didn't even live in the region where they held territory. And so fairly often communities, like communes, as that's where the word comes from, would run themselves. They would be fairly autonomous, and they would deal with many of their issues on their own terms. They would have locally elected mayors, locally elected leaders, and they would tend to figure out with defining things in a rather democratic fashion. And that was a lot of what you would call today peasant culture, was a lot of very locally focused, fairly democratic ways of running things. Most feudal lords were, unless they were like really, really harsh on taxes or something like that, were fairly absent for a lot of the time. And so medieval people, I think, depending upon where they lived, had different views on things, but for the most part, that was their representation. Did medieval scholars have any arguments for why kings were better than the somewhat democratic systems that existed in Greece and Rome? Yes. They believed very strongly that in the idea that these people were selected by God to rule this land, and they had very strong cultural ideas about how the gods and the rulers, the feudal lords, were ordained by divine intervention to be the rulers of this land. And they felt very strongly that if the wrong ruler was ruling the land, that very bad things would happen. Like, they literally thought that, like, if there was a king that wasn't destined to be king by God on the throne, that, like, there'd be, like, natural disasters and things that would happen. So they very much, they had a much more religious worldview, and that kind of feeds into that. What do you think about private land ownership? Another thing I want to get one more thing about that thing. A lot of people who also didn't believe in democracy, this is kind of more of an early Enlightenment thing. A lot of people who thought that democracy was sort of giving people who had no knowledge about how to run the world the keys to the power of running the world. Like, they tended to think that, like, not only these people are ordained by God, but they dedicate their lives to statecraft, while, like, your average person will just, vote for whatever it is that they want for themselves, which they thought was, people were fickle and prone to just getting favors and things like that. That's why when America was founded, there was a lot of controls put in place to keep, quote unquote, the rabble from taking over the government. They thought too much democracy would be anarchy, and they thought that in a bad way. All right. What do you think about private land ownership? Do you think all land should be legally turned into common land? Yes. Yes. I agree that land should be held in common, and we should have personal property, not private property. I do think that one of the most disgusting things about the way that our society works today is that we have subjected housing to market pressure, so that houses have become part of private property, not personal property, in which case people buy property not to use it to live in, but in order to use it as a way to create asset finance. Like, say, the person who owns this apartment that I pay rent to. They own this place. They've never lived in it, I would imagine, but they own it and they probably own their own house just so that they can make money off somebody else who doesn't have enough money to get into it. And by rich people doing that, they decrease the supply of housing and increase the price of housing. And in places like Toronto, that gets out of control because as the prices go up, more people who are wealthy will buy more property in order to make profit, and then the price goes even more up. And so just like how connecting our healthcare and our education to the private marketplace was shown to not be a way to manage those facets of our world, we should probably not leave housing up to the same thing. We should not leave anything up to the same thing, but let's just start, going back to brass tacks. I do think that housing and land should not be considered a private property. Suppose we discovered a portal to an alternate Earth that's already fully communist. Could a capitalist Earth and a communist Earth have peaceful relations? Yes, they've done that before. What's it called? That's how, China and the United States became allies in the 1970s during the Cold War. Even near the very, very end of the Soviet Union, under Gorbachev's regime, Gorbachev's Soviet Union and the United States were starting to improve relations a little bit. If Gorbachev had longer with the Soviet Union, I imagine he would have improved things somewhat. But yeah, international relations between communist and capitalist countries have been possible. They're difficult, but they are possible. It would definitely be tense, that's for sure. I have said hashtag I wouldn't run because I have yelled I do want a revolution. Is there a reason why you hashtag wouldn't run? And what would that reason or reasons be? I've thought about running at different times, but I do think that one of the reasons I hashtag wouldn't run is because I don't think it would suit. I feel like I'm more suited to being an activist than a politician. I feel like the life of a politician would be very frustrating for me. And while the pulpit, the bully pulpit, the platform that comes with being a politician would be really useful for advancing good ideas, I do think that the party system and the parliamentary system would be thoroughly a nightmare to navigate. And on top of that, given all of the content that I've put out, it would be extremely easy for somebody to do oppo research to try and wreck me as a person in front of anybody who I ran against, because it would be hard to justify why I'm running for parliament as a anarchist who has openly said I'm an anarchist all the time. Local office, I was considering looking at provincial parliament, which is, I guess, local, but it's still pretty big. Christos Nicolau. Oh yeah, for some random geek, provincial would be like running for state government, like state senator or state congressman or whatever. Speaking of extremely destructive weapons, does anyone know details about countries without militaries? Costa Rica, Iceland. I know they both have kinds of alternatives. I do not know anything about those. Democratic Communist. Are you thinking about streaming gaming? I think gaming is a way to sneak leftist Discord into the mainstream. One of the things I think I do want to do, if I get to go full time, so if I get to the point where I'm no longer working a day job, is I might work out a Twitch stream. I don't know when it would be, but I feel like if I had enough time in the rest of the week to work on videos, that some sort of Twitch gaming stream might be interesting. What I would play, that is very, very up for debate, because I have my interest in video games wax and wanes pretty hardcore. Like right now, I'm pretty deep in a feeling like I don't even like video games at the moment. I'm kind of just playing a little bit of Diablo 3, but like I sometimes I'm just like I just don't want to play video games, and I just want to. I'm getting into drawing, which I know you can do on Twitch. So maybe I can. I don't know. Maybe I can work that out. But that's for the future to behold. I think the bigger thing that I would want to do, the first thing I'd like to expand into, if I had the time for it, would probably be into podcasting. I think that's the next. That's the next expansion of my platform that I'm really just waiting on being able to quit my day job in order to get into. Democratic Communist, how would you define feudalism? The feudalism is basically when when specific individuals have a hereditary based ownership of large swaths of land, and the people on it are sworn as subjects or vassals of the person on top of them, and like that whole network of vassalage. It's based out of a primarily agrarian economy, where land and farming land specifically is directly linked to political power, and so that tends to come out of that kind of system. But you know, things change. How do we get rid of the state if we can't vote out the existence or fight it effectively? Well, 255, if I had an answer to that, I feel like I would be shouting it from the rooftops. I do think that there is some value in real direct action, specifically replacing the functions of the state, in a sense. Like, I think that there would be a lot of value in changing, like right now we live in a world where a lot of the basic functions of the state, or that the state should be providing, or the functions that a functioning society need, are not being provided. And I feel like the start that we should be able to have is moving away from our idea that if we want to solve these problems, we need to petition the government to pretty please do it for us, and instead create those institutions on our own that function outside of the capitalist economy and outside of the state functions. So to me, that would mean things like if we can't make homes for everybody, if we can't rely on the state to make homes affordable for people, we should start squatting in them, and we should start taking over all these empty homes and giving them to people to live in. It'll be resisted, but we just keep trying. I think things like Food Not Bombs are very effective at making sure that, like, food is a right, food is free, and giving it away to people who need it. And just creating more of the informal networks for exchanging things, like gifts of, everyday objects, making people more and more reliant on their neighbors for the things they need than, like, stores. Like, I feel like if we were better at, giving away and repairing the things that we have to people who need them, instead of buying new things and throwing things out, I feel like that is an effective way of sidestepping the capitalist system. And I don't know what the tipping point of that would be, but I do think that those kinds of systems are, in my mind, a better step towards replacing the state with something better that we can do now. And we can deal with how do we put the death knell in the state once and for all when it's been severely weakened, because nearly everything that people think it's supposed to do is done by other people. All right. Aristotelian Marxism. What do you think of the idea? I do not know what Aristotelian Marxism is. I'm trying to think what Aristotelian Marxism would be, but I'm kind of drawing a blank. Hi, are Putin and Trump liberals? I would call them more reactionaries, nationalists, or kind of proto-fascists, because they're not really liberals in the sense that they believe in free markets, free speech, and like free, like positive freedoms. They believe very much in tight state control, a unified, ethnically homogenous nation state, and basically waging war on the other, which I would call more proto-fascist than say liberal. Christos Nicolau, can Native American notions of land use help us in this regard? I've heard interesting snippets. To an extent, I think that that indigenous concepts of land ownership are a little bit misunderstood by us today. But I do like the idea of that they never, like, they didn't have the destruction of the commons that, say, like Europe had. So they have an idea that, like, you can use the earth, you can't own the earth, and I think that that is an important distinction that I think we should definitely adopt. How would you differentiate rent and tax? I think some individuals misrepresent medieval rent as tax, mainly because legal power was exclusively held by landlords. So in a feudal society, you would give a percentage of your annual crop yield to whoever you were a vassal to. So that was part of the regular feudal. That's tax, right? Or that's rent. Tax back then was not a thing that happened annually like it happens here. What taxes usually were, like in those days, were when the government needed to raise money, usually to go to war. They would literally send people to people's houses and say, give us a bunch of money for the king. And if they refused, sometimes they'd beat the shit out of them and take it anyway. And so there's a very strong reason why, like, anytime they tried to impose a tax on people, they would just go from door to door and start trying to take people's money. That very quickly people did not like them. So taxes were usually a very unpopular last resort when the government needed to fund war. It has evolved a lot since then, obviously. Killing everyone with a virus and then starting again with babies grown in tanks who will be taught to be communists from birth. Would that be an effective way to get rid of capitalism? I mean, yes, but, like, what? It'd be like, wouldn't like nuking the entire planet out of existence, like, wouldn't like making the entire human race extinct be a great way to solve climate change? It's like, I mean, like, I guess, but that's, like, not the point. That's, like, very, what's that weird leftist stream called, like, Posadism or something like that? Where it's, like, the idea that, you get a bunch of communists onto a remote island and then you just, like, nuke the entire world out of existence. And then you can start over from scratch. I think that's Posadism. Or, like, what's another thing? And I think, like, Posadists also believe something that, like, aliens are communists. And, like, because communism is inevitable, that all of the sufficiently advanced alien races are going to be communists, and so that we should petition the UFOs to come and intervene on our behalf, because we just know through the science of Marxism-Leninism that all of the alien races are going to be Marxists, which I think is interesting. Posadism is strange. It's a very strange current in leftist thought. All right. Some random geek. I am an anarchist too. I found it really hard to justify running for office as an anarchist. Do you agree? Yeah. I think that if you have a very particular type of personality, that you could do a lot of good if you were in government. But I do think that for people who are inclined to become anarchists, they would chafe a lot at the kinds of things you have to do to be successful in it. Why do we call ancient China feudalistic when peasantry there answered to state bureaucrats rather than hereditary lords? I have no idea. I did not know they called it feudalism. I thought they called it feudalism in Japan because Japan was a lot more feudalistic, but I'm not super up to date with Chinese history to really speak to that. Why do we call... Oh, we did that one. Will there be no Europe-friendly streams after you get rid of the countdown stream again? Unfortunately, yes. I do live in North America, and I do have a day job, so for the time being, I won't be able to do that because I'll be at the office Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and so it's really hard for me to do a stream that's Europe-friendly in that meantime. Unless I did something drastic like streaming on the weekends, which is something I really don't want to do. But I could, but I do the Subscriber Appreciation Day stream still, so that will still be a kind of European-friendly time to do streams, but even then, it's usually pretty late in the evening, if I remember correctly. Do you think communist or anarchist or feminist ideas in popular TV shows like the now ended Game of Thrones could make such ideas palatable to the general mainstream population? Oh, hell yeah. I am definitely into making more socialist positive art. What happens is very often you have these ideas get portrayed in art because they're popular, in pop culture because it's popular, but made by people who you can very obviously tell through the work they don't actually believe these things. And so very much often you get this sort of these sort of weak half-measure political messages in media. But we can subvert that because we have internet and we have YouTubers and such like that that bypass all of those gatekeepers, those wealthy people. And now you got, like, you know, broke-ass poor people like me making content. So we need more of that. I think it is effective praxis. Do you think the U.S. is going to start a war with Iran, or is Trump just blowing hot air? I'm hoping that he thinks he's going to go to war with Iran, but that people will step in to stop that at some point, because the rest, like, unlike Iraq, the rest of the world is kind of going to be wise to this being a flagrant imperialistic invasion. On top of that, so it doesn't have, like, even the middling amount of international support that Bush had when he invaded Iraq. But at the same time, anybody who knows anything about military strategy and the military realities of a war with Iran would show that Iran is a very modern country with a modern military, and even without access to nuclear weapons, would be a formidable foe for the United States. And I imagine that anybody who is top brass in the military would be able to say that, you know, the U.S. couldn't even manage Afghanistan with its, like, barely functioning state. They couldn't even handle that insurgency for, like, you know, 15 years or whatever. What makes you think that a very modern country with like a pretty fancy tech sector and like a very modern military with like fighter jets and stuff is going to be successful, or is going to be a walk in the park? They'd be mistaken. And I feel like I just feel like the war would be an unmitigated disaster for anybody, for the United States, and I think that most people know that. And I'm hoping that Trump is just that if Trump even tries to entertain it, that somebody will tell him, like, no, and hopefully he'll listen. But the problem we live in is that we don't live in a world where people make rational actor theory ideas. We live in a world where a, like, gas bag is president. And so is that going to happen? Probably. I hope not. That's my answer. I hope not. All right, I got two more questions. We're already past time. The new video is out. I will give you a link in a second, but I feel like you guys are entitled to have me answer the last two questions, but I'm not going to take any more. Do you have any advice to millennials feeling trapped by their parents' home without any chance of advancing beyond the minimum wage? At the moment, not particularly. I would probably say that we live in a pretty unfair economic system that rewards less. I would say that if you want to move out of that, figure out what specialized skills you have, what educational background you have, and try to make network connections, because the quote-unquote informal job network, which is completely the opposite of a meritocracy, is basically the way that people get jobs that pay decently. And so you should be making connections with people and trying to move up that way. And the last question is, when will we get the Eugene Debs biopic? And the answer to that is not soon enough. Alrighty, I'm going to get the new video out for you. It is about Game of Thrones, sort of. It's about episode 5 of the two, like, last episode, not the one that came out yesterday, but the one that came out before. So there's no spoilers, and even the spoilers of episode 5 are mild. So I'm gonna get that link for y'all in the chat, and I'm gonna go and turn this puppy off. So you guys have a great time, and for anybody who comes to all the streams, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.